Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
This is very strange. I can see you. It says everyone can see and hear me. Hold on.
Okay, we'll get started shortly just as we finish figuring this little.
You still can't see me, right?
No.
All right, let me log back in. It was working before. Ugh. Okay, I'm logging.
Okay, we'll get started, everyone, in just a minute. We're very excited for this important and fascinating conversation on speaking to your kids about holy and healthy intimacy, sexuality, consent, and all the topics you've been waiting to hear about.
Ah, great. Okay.
Okay, Rachel and Yardaena, I'm really excited to get started. Contrary to what I shared in my promotional video, the talk is not canceled, but we are going to approach having the talk with your kids in a very different way. There's no one talk. It's really a lifetime conversation with your kids. And, we're going to meet them and give you tools to meet them at every stage that they're at. Something that, you might be surprised to hear is that speaking about consent and bodies begins at infancy. So we're going to dive right into that. But before we do, I want to share a piece of Torah from the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Tractate Brachot, 62a. A very, maybe you've heard the story, maybe not. It's a very shocking story. And I think it helps us frame this conversation about why it's so important to speak to our children at all of their ages and life stages about sexuality and intimacy in their bodies. So the story goes as follows. Rav Kahana al gana tute purei de Rav. Rav Kahana hid under Rav's bed. Okay, so already the story starts out in a very curious way. Sham'ei desach v'sachak v'asat rachav. And he heard him laughing and chatting and fulfilling his needs, which in the Talmudic verbiage basically means engaging in foreplay and in intercourse. Amar le, dame puma de'aba kedilo sarif tavshila. Rav Kahana from underneath the bed calls out in this moment of intimacy between Rav and his wife, meaning Rav Kahana, the student, is under his teacher's bed while his teacher, is engaged in foreplay and intercourse with his wife. And he calls out, wow, you're acting as if you've never tasted food before, meaning he's so surprised that Rav is so excited and, basically, very involved in this act of intimacy and intercourse. Obviously, the story is, jarring. And what's the response of Rav? Amar le Kahana, hacha'at. Kahana, is that you? Hook, they love arach, get out of here. This is so inappropriate. Obviously, you can imagine, as a teacher, I can imagine what a horrifying moment this is. Probably incredibly disturbing, confusing. He says, Rav Kahana, get out of here. And what's Rav Kahana's response? Amar le Torahi v'lilmod ani tzarich. This is Torah, and I must learn it. So at first glance, it seems like the student is the one in the wrong. Like, what was the student thinking? Why is the student hiding under his teacher's bed? What's going on here? This is ridiculous. Like, you would expel this student from a school, probably. You can imagine sort of the reaction that we would have to a student who does this. But there's actually a lot of layers to the story and a lot of nuance. But the one I want to focus on is that actually, I think what the Gemara is saying is that the teacher, Rav, has failed in this sense. He failed to teach his student appropriately, and therefore his student, the next generation, sought out this information in an inappropriate way. And Rav Kahana is saying, this is Torah, this is part of my life, right? If we view Torah as all-encompassing in our life, he's saying, this is essential to my life. And he's also saying, isn't there something holy and kadosh about this? Like, don't I need to know this because I am a student of Torah? So kind of also adding that element, that there is an element of holiness and connection to the divine when we think about our bodies and our sexuality. And he understands that message, but he has no tools to learn about it. And Rav says, well, this is not the way we teach these things. And he's right. Boundaries are really important. Privacy is important. Safety is important. But in that moment, Rav, in a sense, is admitting, or sort of subconsciously admitting, that he didn't succeed in teaching him in the right way. He realizes, like, oh my gosh, get out of here. How did we get to this place? And I think the Gemara is being critical here about educators and about, one generation teaching the next generation. And the ending of the story with that line, Torahi v'lilmod ani tzarich, is actually validating Rav Kahana's need to understand this. It's not saying like, and then Rav Kahana was expelled and never was allowed in the Beit Midrash of Rav again. Actually, no, the story ends by saying, Torahi v'lilmod ani tzarich. This is Torah and I must learn it. And that is the approach we really need to take, that if we fail to teach the next generation about sexuality with openness, with guidance, with tools, in an appropriate way, they're going to seek it out in, whether it's inappropriate or whether it's just simply not factual, or they're missing pieces. So when we value openness and communication, and at the same time, have an eye towards the Torah values of privacy, of intimacy, of sexuality and intimacy being something holy and kadosh, we can really succeed in teaching the next generation. And in that, sometimes in that process, teaching ourselves, which is something that we'll touch on as well. I feel really passionately about this work, and I'll just speak briefly before I invite Rachel Tuchman, licensed mental health counselor, and Dr. Yardaena Osband, pediatrician and public speaker, to talk about the different life stages, what tools we give, and how. But before that, actually, how they came to this work. I can say for myself, I actually went to an Orthodox community day school in North Miami Beach, where they actually did a good job, I felt, of teaching us at different stages about sexuality, about our bodies. And I actually grew up in a home where it was spoke about very openly and factually. My mother is a medical professional, and that was always, no questions were barred. We understood all the information from a medical perspective. And when I went to my year in Israel and then college, I was shocked at how many brilliant young women I met that lacked so much basic information about their bodies, and they suffered because of it, and they struggled because of it. And I think that we have an obligation as, adults, as parents. I myself, I'm an educator. I teach it, besides for being a Yoetzet Halacha in Los Angeles, I teach at Eula Girls High School, and I've helped develop and sort of grow their sexual education and Jewish perspectives on sexuality curriculum in the school. And the students are, they're so grateful, and the parents are as well. And so I feel really passionately that this is important work. This is important to talk about, and that's really a partnership between educators and parents. And we're today really focusing on the parent piece here. Yardaena, why don't you tell us a little bit about what brought you to be passionate about this work, and just some introductory thoughts, maybe some chizuk to parents who might feel like a little bit hesitant to enter this world of, opening up these conversations. And then Rachel, you will also do the same.
Thank you so much, Ilana. And I think that's a great Gemara to start with.
Actually, one second, I'll just interrupt you and say, if anyone wants to see the different bios, you can scroll down, and if you click, I'm skipping over the bios, but you can click and see the illustrious bios of our speakers today, because it's really amazing, and we're really privileged to be joining together to talk. So sorry, Yardaena, I didn't mean to, Dr. Osband, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but take it away now.
Thank you. And you certainly should be calling me Yardaena. No, and I appreciate the Gemara that you started with, which I think really drives home the point that this is part of a full education that any Torah teacher should be giving to their student. And obviously, by extension, that would mean what our obligation is in the chinuch for our own children. I'm a pediatrician who's been in practice for over 14 years. I also do a lot of teaching. I co-host a Daf Yomi podcast called Talking Talmud. And why I feel passionate about this is that I think we sort of tend to really disconnect this part of our life as a parent, that many of us were really raised in homes that maybe this was not something that was openly discussed, or maybe our parents didn't necessarily educate us in the best way that they possibly could have. And so I think the challenge for many parents is sort of really recognizing sort of what their background was, what are they bringing to the table, what are their biases, how was their own upbringing, or maybe some of their own personal experiences impacting their ability or their enthusiasm about talking about these things with their children. So my pediatrician work informs this, because a big part of my being a pediatrician is really helping families and parents sort of find their groove with a lot of parenting. And it's not that I believe there's one way to do anything, whether it's toilet training, disciplining, and even these types of issues, talking about sex with your kids, but it's more about being a guide to think about what's going to best fit for your family. But I think this particular issue is interesting with families, because people really bring so much of their own upbringing and how they feel about the topic and their comfort level to how they want to parent it. And so I think it's really important to sort of explore that piece by yourself, with a partner, if you're parenting with a partner, to really think about, why are you uncomfortable? What pieces of this topic make you uncomfortable? Are there specific ages or specific areas that make you uncomfortable? Because until you've explored that part of it, it's going to be very difficult to speak about this in an open and honest way. I probably have my own children feel I'm a little bit too open. I grew up in a household that was particularly open also. But, I really would rather have my kids feel that I talk a little bit too much about this than get their information elsewhere. And I guess before I hand it over to Rachel, that's what I would leave it with. This should feel empowering. Like, you are the parent. And so you should feel empowered that you get to be the first line of information. Isn't that amazing? If you choose to be the person who gets to deliver that information first. So we have like a joke in our house. We're a big Moshavah family. We spend every summer there, that before anybody goes into a bunk for the first time, they need to understand what sex is, and exactly all the technicals of how a baby is made, because we wouldn't ever want it that our child learned it from another child, and maybe there were errors in that, or who knows how it was spoken about, maybe with some slang or with some other ways of speaking about it that's not particularly respectful or holy or spiritual. So again, my pep talk to everybody listening is like, empower yourself. You're really in control, and you, if you get, forward and ahead of this and really think about this proactively, you really get to be in charge with like how your children learn this information firsthand, and not sort of allowing, I definitely have parents in my office who come and say like, oh, they'll learn about it in school, they'll learn about it on the bus. But why? There's so many other things we teach our children. Why would you want to leave this up to other people to share with your children? So really to empower ourselves that this is something we should be teaching our children, and can do it better than anybody else can, because we know our children best.
So, I mean, I'm going to kind of combine the two of your answers together, and I'm going to say that, yes, this is so important. This is really a parent's job, that we should be talking to our kids about this. And I find that often in my work, parents don't know how to talk to kids about sensitive topics. And it could be things like sexuality and body image. And then it could be things that are a little bit more, less uncomfortable, but it could be things like talking about how to deal with their friends, or peer pressure, or drugs and alcohol. So it's really important that parents learn to talk to their kids about everything. It keeps them connected. It keeps our kids safer. We want to be, like Yardaena said, the primary source of information. You want to be more accessible to your kids than a Google search. And right now, these days, it's literally in their hands. It's not that they have to come home and wait for that dial up and like all those weird noises from AOL connections, right? Like, it's literally at their fingertips all day long. And if it's not in their hands, it's in their friends' hands. So you really want to make sure that you are the primary source, that your kids feel that there is a shame-free, safe environment where they can come and talk to you and ask you questions. And if they've heard something from a friend, they can come and kind of get the information from you. Is that right? That's what I heard, or that's not what we talked about. Can you tell me if this is correct? When your kids feel like they can talk to you about these things, they're just more empowered in the world. They have more confidence. They know how to handle difficult situations. And it helps them in terms of, whenever they're in a situation where maybe they need to be able to speak up, they're empowered. So they are able to advocate for themselves. They're safer. It removes shame from their lives, from their interactions. It helps them in doctors' offices to describe where they're feeling any discomfort or pain. It creates healthy body image, and it creates a healthy relationship with sexuality. And it's important for us to realize that sexuality, it's an aspect of being human. It's with us our entire lives. It's more than just sex and reproduction. It's really who we are. It's our bodily functions. And this is really something that, like Ilana, you were saying in the beginning, Judaism does not believe in suppressing sexuality. We really believe in sanctifying it. It is not immoral. We don't take that societal view of nudity and sexuality being immoral. It's not. It's something that we feel is very much a part of our lives, and that we have the ability to make it something that is actually wonderful and beautiful, and something that we can honor when we use it properly. And there's a difference between privacy and shame. And when we tell our kids that this is something private, that we don't like, it's not our daily discussion, that doesn't mean that it's something we never discuss because it's bad. It just means that there's a time and a place for it. In our doctor's offices, when there's questions, when you're going through phases of life where you need to know about things, when it's, you're reaching puberty, when you've encountered a situation that might feel confusing for you, these conversations are always happening. And like you said, Ilana, they start in infancy. It's not like that talk when they're 10 years old. Okay, I'm going to sit you down and start from A to Z. These are micro lessons that we build on throughout the course of their lives. And we're always learning, and we're always growing, and we're always creating that environment that our kids know and feel that they can come and talk to us about anything. We're not going to laugh them away. We're not going to yell at them. And even if we are uncomfortable with the conversation ourselves, because maybe we've never had it, or we never thought about it, or we ourselves are still not so comfortable with it, that can even be a part of the conversation, which we'll get into a little bit more, where we just admit to our kids, like, hey, like, this is weird for me, but I'm so happy that we're talking about it. So really connection and building healthy relationships is really at the core of this kind of approach and the importance of this work.
Thank you. Yeah, amazing. That point about privacy not necessarily needing to, not just not necessarily, but privacy doesn't mean shame and secrecy. And that privacy means that there is a context and a space for, you know, sexuality and for our bodies. And then, you know, there are spaces where we don't engage in those things or talk about those things, not in a way of shame, but in a way of, like you said, boundaries and privacy. And I think that that's such an important point. And I think it also helps, you know, frame later on when you're talking to teens about, you know, why halacha has restrictions on who you can be intimate with, when you can be intimate. I think once they already have a framework of context from the biological perspective and from the bodily perspective, that they understand the beauty in what context and boundaries are in from a halachic perspective. And when I, you know, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but when I teach teens, I really try to help them see that. And that I think really starts, like we said, believe it or not, from birth, from infancy. So we're actually going to talk now about, you know, birth through preschool age. And, you know, as a parent of a toddler and a preschool child, like, you know, I'm very careful to use correct anatomical terms, and we're going to talk about that right now. And sometimes I've been like a little bit like teased by my friends, you know, when you say like, okay, we're going to use the term vulva and not front tushy or your pishy pish. You know, sometimes, you know, I joked when we were preparing that my friend said like, you're not going to be the vulva mom, are you? And I said like, well, what does that mean? Like, could I, that's like saying I'm going to be the elbow mom. Like, that's just the name of the body part. And I think that that's, you know, it could be like a little bit funny, and people might feel awkward using a term they might not have used before, but we're going to talk about actually right now why that's so important from birth and infancy. So Dr. Osband, please take it away. Get us started with birth through preschool. How do we talk about bodies and consent and sexuality? Like, what does this mean, birth through preschool? Like, isn't that so soon? Isn't that so early? So
right. So how we talk about these issues and setting the tone for our home really does begin at birth. And it begins exactly like you said, with always using correct body parts. So using words like penis, vagina, not front tushy, back tushy, lots of other names and euphemisms that I've heard before. But I think it's also that even starting, you know, at age 2 and 3, really already talking about the ideas of, you know, the way we sort of talk about it today are using words like consent, but really more about, you know, that these are private parts of your body. And they're not parts of the body we show to other people. You have to give permission for somebody to look. So one thing I'm always very careful about in my office, starting around age 2.5, 3, is when I do get to the genital part of the exam, is I always look at the child straight in their eye and I say, do you give me permission to look in your underwear now? And if a child actually says no or resists it, I very explicitly say to them, I will not check this part of your body, even though it's just checking a part of your body the same way I check your heart or your lungs, until you give me permission. And then once the child grants permission, I then will look over at the parent who's there and say, you know, being very clear to say, I'm also only allowed to do this because your parent is in the room. And even though I'm the doctor, I wouldn't be allowed to do this unless your parent was here with me and both of you gave me permission to do this. So it's, you know, little subtle things like this that I think really set an important tone of really, you know, having children understand that they really should have agency over their own body. And I think it's also, even when we're playful with kids, you know, I have children who range in age from 19 to 5. And so there's always a lot of, you know, like wrestling in the house and tushy patching and things like that. But really paying attention to, like, when a kid says, you know, I don't want to be tickled, I don't want to be touched or something like that, that it's, you know, your job as the parent to really say to the other siblings, or if they're telling that to you as a parent, you know, to really say, okay, I'm not, you know, we're going to back off. This is not something I'm going to do because, you know, you said that that's not something that you enjoy or something that you want right now. I think the other thing that we see with a lot of preschool parents that makes parents very uncomfortable is issues of masturbation. So it's very normal for boys and girls to want to touch their genitals. It does feel good for them sometimes, and sometimes it's a sense of like, their underwear is bothering them, and they don't necessarily sort of have the same sense that we do, that, if you're going to fix your tights, you walk into another room to do it, and they sort of just do it in public. But sometimes it's really about exploring and doing that. And so I think ways to talk about that with children is to emphasize with them that is a totally normal thing to do. But that's something that we do privately. You should do that in your bedroom. You can do that in the bathroom while you're in the bathtub, but it's not something we do. Like, I often find kids like to do that. Like, let's say if you're watching TV together as a family, or they're trying, something like that, just remind them that's not really something we do in front of other people. It's a totally okay activity, but it's something that we have to do privately. So again, I think a lot of this is just letting children using correct body parts, already setting up the idea of agency over one's body, and ideas of permission and consent. And last, what are really normal activities? And that when we see kids do these types of things, again, it's not telling them that it's shameful or it's wrong, but more giving them the tools to say, like, this is something you may want to do, but where is it appropriate and how is it appropriate to do?
Yeah, I think that definitely naming the body parts and functions are super important. It keeps them safer. It keeps them informed. And the way that we can start doing that in infancy is like while you're changing their diaper, just like tell them, okay, now I'm wiping your tushy, now I'm wiping your vulva, now I'm wiping your penis, whatever it is. Just like naming it just becomes part of the vocabulary. It becomes very normal. It becomes very safe. Also, I think normalizing body functions is really important. And I know in some houses when kids like fart or burp, it's like, ew, and it's like this huge reaction. And I think people don't realize that those reactions, our kids interpret them as like, oh, that's bad, or that's embarrassing, or that's shameful. And I've actually seen clients who have marriages where they cannot fart in front of their spouse. And like, it's a source of incredible tension and shame. I can't even I have to be nervous and hold in my bodily functions because my spouse is going to find me repulsive, right? That really has an impact on us. So normalizing it. So when your kid, when your little, child is on the toilet and they're farting and they're pooping, you say, wow, amazing. Your body's doing what it's supposed to do. Incredible, right? Just letting them know. Obviously we want manners. So they're not burping at the table with everyone around and they're not lifting themselves up to fart at the table, right? That's rude. So we tell them, of course, we need to be mindful. We don't just let things out in front of people. We say, excuse me, but that we just normalize that this is how healthy bodies work, right? Like a fart is it's a wonderful thing. It's a sign that the body's doing what it's supposed to do. Going to the bathroom, thank God for that, right? Even telling them look, we have a bracha that we say that you say in school. There's this blessing we say to thank God for our bodily functions. It is a wonderful thing. So even when they're little, and again, not creating shame or embarrassment or mockery around things that their bodies are supposed to be doing is really important. And again, I think it's important for us to, when they have siblings, so if you have an older son or an older daughter, and then you have a younger sibling, even telling those children the name of the body parts of their opposite gender sibling, so that there creates this empathy and awareness of other people's bodies. So brothers are not calling their sisters' vaginas and vulvas front tushies. They know that's her vulva. She has a vagina. She's a girl. He's a boy. He has a penis and a scrotum. That's how it, that's the name of it. I think that's very important for them to understand and to be able to have that respect for other people's bodies as well. So I think that that's how we create those conversations, just by starting with just naming them. The words roll off our tongue, just like eyes, ears, elbows, nose. Same thing, scrotum, clitoris, nipples, whatever it is. And there's, if you feel uncomfortable saying it at first, that's fine. The more you say it, it becomes normal, and it will become normal for them. So I think that's really where it starts. And then, yes, we have those discussions like Yardaena was saying about safe touch and appropriate touch, and who we can show our bodies in front of, right? So if there's company in the house, you don't run from the bathroom naked into downstairs. And again, that's not a shame-based thing. That's just a privacy thing and a body respect thing, right? That our bodies are not for everybody to see. We're mindful of how we present ourselves, and just being very sensitive in how you talk about these subjects with our kids. And again, letting them know, any questions, I'm here. All bodies are good. And I think that sets the tone for those later discussions that you're going to have when they're older that are a little bit more detailed or sensitive.
One thing I would just want to add to that about, the idea of bodies is I get a lot of questions or discuss with parents, nudity in the house. Like, should your kids be in the room with you when you change? Families who tend to, sometimes will shower together, even with parents, adults. So, I'm personally of the feeling, I think it's actually a very healthy way for preschool and toddlers to learn what normal adult bodies look like what they're supposed to look like when they're grown up, that there's hair in certain areas, that parts of the body actually get larger when you're an adult. Again, I understand that this may be very sensitive to certain parents, because, in other words, like, they may have grown up in a household where they never, ever saw their parents naked. And I'm not at all advocating sort of like a gratuitous, like, you have to change in front of your kids, but more like if you're getting changed or getting dressed and, your 2-year-old or 3-year-old walks into the room, not sort of like covering up immediately, but just that it's sort of like, you're there and, you're, putting your shirt on or putting, a bra on or whatever it is that you're sort of getting dressed. So I think there are different ways for different families to do it. And I also will say, you will know at what point it becomes not appropriate, right? In other words, you'll have a 4 or 5-year-old who will make a comment either about your body or the opposite gender parent body. That just sort of clues you in, like, they're really noticing the differences. They understand the differences. They understand what people look like, and it's probably just not appropriate anymore. And I think that's also true with issues of like kids bathing together. You'll sort of you'll know, and different things will work for different families. But again, I think at least minimally, if a kid walks in on you while you're getting dressed or something like that, or even in the bathroom, which happens with little kids all the time, not covering up, not yelling right away, you must get out. This is a very normal way for kids to see adult bodies and learn what they're supposed to look like.
Yeah, I just want to add to that and just say that I love that. That's such an important point. And I think sometimes when someone walks in, our reaction is to be like, oh my gosh. So we could just say, oops, I'm getting dressed. I want privacy. And I think that's a wonderful example also for our kids of like requesting privacy. And just to kind of like add to that, to what Yardaena was saying, a few more of the signs to look for when kids like shouldn't be seeing you naked anymore is if you get the sense that they're uncomfortable. So if they walk in and you're like, oops, and they're like, oh, like more than oops, like, oh my gosh, I didn't want to see. Then you should know, like, okay, I'm going to say, guys, I'm going to get dressed now. I'm closing the door. Don't come in. So that they have that warning of like, okay, mom's, or I'm taking a shower. So like, just so you know, knock, right? If they request privacy for themselves. So if they suddenly like don't want you, when they go to the bathroom, they're closing the door, or when they get dressed, they say, I'm getting dressed, don't come in. So that kind of means that they're starting to like pay attention to the idea of privacy, which is a wonderful thing for them to have. If they're trying to touch your private parts, or if they're like ogling, if they're like, whoa, like way too like into them, or if they're looking away even. So if they're in the room and you're like, okay with it, but they're so uncomfortable, that's kind of a sign that you could be like, you know what? Like, you don't have to be in here while I'm getting dressed. You can go out and like, or I'll go in the bathroom or whatever it is. And just respecting that maybe they feel awkward to be like, why are you getting undressed in front of me? So looking out for those cues and in that way, again, I think that we model then for our children, like how to appropriately kind of move into that stage where then they start requesting that privacy themselves, which is something we do want them to do.
Right. And usually kids are more private about themselves before they get private about you. So they may insist, like in my home, it certainly has been that, they don't want me in the room when they're changing, but everybody sort of forgets to knock on the door sometimes. So, and I think that's also okay. Like, it's okay for them to take a little bit more agency than the parent, but so that's also typically very normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about if a preschooler, age 3 or 4, asks like, oh, so-and-so's mommy is having a baby, or there's a baby in someone's belly, or hey, how did the baby come? Like, how, and when they ask like basically asking like, where do babies come from? For this age group, what types of, phrases and information is relevant and appropriate to explain to a preschooler how babies are made? What, if they ask about what are those body parts for, like kind of giving them, like you said, micro sessions of the talk, but really the lifelong conversation. How do we begin those conversations for preschool age? Rachel, you can start us off.
I wasn't sure. So I think that when kids ask these questions, the rule is always honest and truthful, but age appropriate, right? So we need to consider like who we're speaking to. So if you're speaking to a 3-year-old, basic is always better. So really like very little information. So if they say like, oh, this one's mommy is having a baby, where does the baby come from? You can say, the baby is in the mommy's uterus. And then when it's time for the baby to come out, she'll go to the doctor, or maybe she'll have a home birth, whatever it is. So you can just say, then her uterus will squeeze the baby and it'll come out. Usually kids are okay with just that basic information. They don't generally tend to ask more, but if they do ask more, then you can continue on and you can give them more information. You can tell them there's such a thing as a C-section, right? So they have a special surgery and then they take the baby out that way, or the baby is squeezed out through the mommy's vagina. Done. And again, kids are usually okay with that. They're not asking for more. They're not looking for more, but really just keeping it super simple and just asking what they're asking you, like not getting into like biology and getting very complicated. Less is really more for a child. And you'll see then as they get older, again, we're building, right? Those micro lessons. So then when they start getting into those more complex questions, like, wait, how did the baby get in there? And we'll get into that more, I'm sure. But then there's already this foundation you've built from them about a uterus and about a baby being born, vaginally or through a C-section. So there's already a lot of like foundation that you've built for them that makes these conversations easier and also just not awkward and very comfortable and easy to have.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And I think that kind of brings us through that now to the elementary school age, around 5 to 8, to I guess maybe we can even start with continuing that conversation for 5 to 8-year-olds, talking about how they're more likely probably to be asking about how does a baby get in there, or, oh, those people are kissing, or what's that magazine ad about? Like they start noticing things and asking questions. So I guess let's talk about that. And then I'd also love, if for this school age, to hear about also about consent and safe touch and body safety for this age as well. So first, I guess starting off with how to continue that conversation for this age group, 5 to 8-year-olds, and then also talking about body safety and consent for this age group as well. And Rachel, why don't you continue on with how you would continue that conversation with an older age, and then Dr. Osband will fill us in as well.
Yeah. So again, when they're younger, they can't really grasp complicated concepts. As they're older, they can definitely start understanding more. Also, as they understand their bodies more and see more of the world and through experience, they're able to better understand. So when they ask you ages 5 to 9, like, so where's the baby come from? So you can say from the mommy's vagina, or again, whatever. You can even include, again, your birth stories, right? So if you've done an IVF or you had a C-section, you can definitely teach your kids about that too as they get older. So just keep that in mind. So, from the mommy's vagina, and then how do the babies get in there? There's an egg and there's a sperm, and those come together, and the sperm gets cozy in the egg, and then it grows into a baby in the mommy's uterus. You can even stop there because generally kids are happy with that. But again, as they get older, right, in that 5 to 9 year category, then they might be like, okay, but then how do the sperm and egg meet, right? But you don't have to give them that just yet. There's a sperm and an egg, they meet up, they get cozy, and then that's how a baby grows. Later on, they might start asking where the sperm comes from, and then you can get into that, which again we'll progress into soon. But just really breaking it down into these like smaller pieces, and then you continue on as they ask more questions and get more curious. And I've given a resource page that I guess we'll share at the end of this talk, where I have a bunch of books that I suggest that you can read together. Some that you can read on your own. I always tell parents, look at the books before you read them with your kids, because I don't want you reading a book and suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, like, shoot, I wasn't ready to share this yet. Like, I don't want to be on this page yet. So kind of look at the book first, figure out what you want to look at with your kids. You should get comfortable with the book yourself. If it's not a conversation you've like ever had, or you didn't have these conversations as a kid, get used to it, kind of get all those nerves out of you, and then show it, work through the book with your child. And often the books are helpful to kind of ease that like discomfort that we have. So definitely doing that. And then in terms of the consent piece and safety piece, it's important that we are constantly having these discussions, just like we're always having this conversation about our bodies and our functions and our sexuality. We're constantly talking about the sexual abuse piece and prevention and safety, and not from a scary piece, from a scary place, but from a place of taking care of yourself and keeping yourself safe, and not the world is bad, but like that you just like we say, when you cross the street, look both ways, right? Because we want to make sure that they take care of themselves. It's the same thing here. We want them to know how to take care of themselves and to prevent themselves from being hurt. Talk about secrets with your kids, right? So it doesn't have to be like right away, like no one's allowed to touch your private parts, and it might not be a stranger. It could be a person that you know. It doesn't have to be like that. Just be, let's talk about secrets. What do you do if someone tells you a secret? What's the difference between a secret and a surprise, right? A secret is something that we keep for a long time that could hurt somebody. A surprise is something that's like exciting, and it's a birthday present or a surprise party. And then there's privacy. That's respecting our personal space or information. It doesn't hurt anyone. Sometimes it helps to keep things private, you know? Talk about playing doctor with their friends, right? Little kids will do this. And I know some parents freak out. I walked in on Shabbos and my son was playing with his cousin and they were looking at each other's private parts. Again, it's curiosity. It's not predatory. When they're little, this is a normal, healthy behavior, but we just talk to our kids about that. Our bodies are private. That's not how we play. It's normal to be curious about bodies, but we don't touch each other's bodies. We don't look at each other's private parts. When you're giving them a bath, teach them to wash their own private parts and tell them while they're doing that, this is your tushy, this is your penis, this is your vagina, this is your vulva. No one touches it, only you. And even when you're wiping them as they're older, you don't necessarily have to ask their permission, because if your child says, no, you can't wipe me, it's not an option to let them walk around not clean. So you just let them know, I'm going to wipe you now, right? Just giving them like that heads up so that they mentally are prepared that, okay, I'm about to be wiped, or I'm about to be washed, whatever it is. And then letting them know also that, you know, when someone's babysitting them, let's say, you know, a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or even a babysitter, that they can be responsible for washing their own body parts, even at 2-3 years old. You can do your tushy, and you can do your penis, or you could do your vagina, or you could do your vulva. Like no one else has to do it for you. So you can teach a child as young as 2 how to do that. So that's important. And then a fun game to play with like younger kids to teach them about like body, about basically like privacy and boundaries and their space around themselves is something like that's called a body bubble game. And basically they draw like an imaginary body bubble around themselves. Like you do it with them, right? Let's draw our body bubble. And who can we invite into our body bubble? When is a body bubble helpful, right? Are there ways that we can change the shape of the body bubble? And you have to make it a rule in your home that like when somebody says no or stop, like we listen to it, right? And that all the kids listen to that. So we have a rule, you know, so if somebody's, you know, tickling you or someone's sitting next to you and they're like too close to you and they say, move away. She said, move away. You have to move away now, right? She said, it doesn't tickle. She said, it bothers her. He said, you're sitting too close. We really have to advocate for them to listen to each other's no, but also to use their no. So that's really important. And again, I think that empowers them to feel in charge of their bodies, not to feel afraid if they feel uncomfortable with something, to step up and be like, please don't touch me like that, or can you move away? And even just to trust their feelings, which I think is so important. They have to know that like their inner gut is something really, really powerful, and it's something that they should listen to. And I think that is a message we get over time as adults, that we can't trust our bodies and we don't know better, and someone else always knows better than us. And we don't want our kids to think that. We want them to know, you know what feels right. Pay attention to that. So that's in terms of the consent and boundaries and body respect piece.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think teaching kids to trust their gut, you know, like if somebody touches you and it feels yucky, it doesn't feel good. You have to tell them, no, you cannot touch me. And also encouraging them to tell you if somebody touched them in a way that made them not feel good and without feeling shame. And I think this, like, again, you said, starts from birth. If they don't have shame about their body parts, they're more likely to feel comfortable to come to you and tell you that somebody maybe touched them in a way that made them not feel good. And I think that's really important. And Dr. Osband, maybe you can continue with that, and also any added tips on not just talking about consent and body safety, but, you know, talking to kids about sexuality, and as a medical provider, you know, what types of questions kids this age might ask you, or parents might ask you.
Yeah, so just a couple of things that I would add, you know, in terms of the consent issues. I also think issues of consent, or, you know, having kids tell you if, God forbid, something did happen to them, is really, all of this is part of one big continuum. So, for example, I've told, some of my 5-year-olds where a baby comes out of, that it comes out of the vagina, and then you're always a little bit nervous. Like, I didn't need my kid to be the one to come to kindergarten and share that with everybody, because we do need to be sensitive to that. So the way I try to frame it, and I think the way parents should frame it, is more like, we are so lucky that we can talk about anything together. And you can always ask me anything, and I'm always going to tell you truthful answers. But we also know that sometimes things are private, and they're just things that parents and children should talk about right now. And, we shouldn't and we should let your friends talk about that with their parents, right? So sort of making it clear, this isn't something that like friend to friend should be talking about. But that it's really, you're so lucky that you and I get to talk about these things, and we get to share these things together. And, especially also when a child comes to ask you a question, really re-emphasizing to them how proud and happy you are that they came to you. I'm so glad you asked me that question. That's such a good question. I really understand why you were curious about that. It is hard to think about how the baby came out of the mommy, or it's hard to think about, I could understand why you'd want to know how the baby's actually made. And then, you can go into a lot of, those things that Rachel mentioned before about how to sort of discuss the actual specific, the specific points there. So I think it's really fostering an overall sense in your home of, I'm always available to talk to. You can always come to me, and I'm so happy to have these discussions with you. And I'm so happy when you come to me. And the other thing is to remember that these are never one-time discussions. You will often talk about these things multiple times, right? It may start with that your child has a peer whose mother is pregnant, and they observe something, and so they have a question about it. Or, it may be there was an incident on a play date or something, and so there's a reason to bring up these topics. But I think it's also just really important to talk about these things time and time again. When we talk about, some of the older kid issues, I'll talk a little bit more about where specifically I think that is. But almost like your kids should be hearing these things ad nauseum. Like, they should just know that these are things you talk about all the time. So you always talk about consent. You always talk about, body parts. You always, one thing like Rachel was talking about, like if they're going to be babysat. So like, I always make sure to mention to my kids when they were little, like, who is going to be in charge of taking you to the bathroom and wiping you, right? That should be sort of like a designated person. And I always qualify by saying, but that's because mommy and daddy aren't home. So they really have the sense of like, this is a typical activity that your parent helps you with, right? While I'm away, someone else is going to step in, but it's because I'm not here to help you. This isn't who normally would help you. And another thing to keep in mind also is that this may happen in your home with playmates. Like, we've had times where kids have come to our home, they've needed help, within the bathroom or something like that. So we make a very big deal also to say like, okay, do you have permission? And I also tell those kids, I'm telling your mommy or daddy that I helped you to the bathroom, to make it very clear. Also that like everybody knows that we went to the bathroom together. Everybody knows that I had to help you wipe. And so I think it's not just with your own children, but it's also like how you set the whole tone when other kids are in your home as well.
Thanks. That's really helpful advice. Thinking about that angle about other kids or your kids in other situations. Thanks. Yeah, let's move, I guess, to preteen and pre-puberty, where things get a little bit more complex, more nuanced. And I think at this age is when sometimes parents feel even less comfortable really talking about the details and the mechanics of sex and puberty. And, when different ages are developing at different times, like one friend might, start be going through puberty before another. And I think that this is where parents and children kind of get into conversations where they feel like they're less equipped. So let's give everybody the tools and help them be equipped for those conversations. Yardaena, why don't you start us off? And also, if you can speak a little bit about when we're talking about consent and safety, more also talking about media, pornography, which I think some parents might be shocked is really relevant for this age.
Yeah.
Age range.
So this is a topic I spent a lot of time talking about with parents. And the bad news that I'm going to start off is your kids know a lot more than you realize. So for those of you who are listening who have TV in your home, who have access to streaming, whose kids do have phones, and we could spend a whole hour just talking about access and social media. So I'm going to just frame it as more like that's the choice that you've made in your home. That's a choice that I have in my home also. So I'm not talking about the pros and cons of that. But the bad news is that your children are much, much more exposed to things than you are. And one thing parents should really keep in mind is that sort of like the over, let's say 35, 40 crowd, we sort of got, or our, let's say our pornography or information like this, it was very print driven. In other words, like many people may have had the experience where you were at a friend's house and like there was a magazine that maybe was found or a book that was found that, you read all the sexually explicit passages together with a friend or something like that. Today, the problem is that kids are really exposed to visual images of these things. And that really does something very, very different to the brain in terms of how they internalize that in a much different way. So we know that statistically, it's about 70 to 80% of all boys by the age of 11 will have actually seen some form of pornography. We should not kid ourselves at all that does not exist in our observant communities. So for example, like anytime my kids starting at about age 9 go on a sleepover or spend a significant period of time not with me, that is something that I proactively talk about, where I say to them, there may be a kid there with a phone who may want to show you a video or a TV show or a clip of something that might have naked bodies or people doing something that is something might make you uncomfortable watching. It's really important that you tell me about that if that's something that happens. So I really make sure, because I can't control what other kids do. Once it happens, I may say like, this is not going to be an appropriate play date or an appropriate setting for my kid, but it's more that you want your kid to tell you. So at least if that happens. And another way to think about it also is, I always think about the first time, I will totally confess this to everyone, that my brother and I snuck a rated R movie together. My parents went out, there was something on cable, it was a Tom Hanks silly movie, Bachelor Party. Some of you may have seen it. It's as dumb as it sounds. But the point was we had to watch it together, right? There was like a family TV. There was no way that one of us could have watched that without anybody else. The problem now with all the devices that kids have, computers, much earlier, they have phones. Kids are watching a lot of these things by themselves. And the last issue is that there really is not rating systems the way that they were. I am time and time again shocked by what I see on, let's say, Hulu or Netflix. Like, I think I'm just turning on, I'm one of these people who, like, if I'm cleaning up a room or something, I like a little background noise. So this year there was some silly holiday movie I was watching on Netflix called Holiday, which I thought was just going to be like a very dumb rom-com. It was so sexually explicit and it was advertised as a rom-com. And the beginning opening scene was like a whole joke where a boyfriend meets a girl's parents and very explicitly talks about an encounter they had with oral sex. And I could just imagine, you have like a 13-year-old who's on a play date and, they just like turn this on like on a sleepover and they have no idea because it's really advertised for kids. There's not the same rating system that there used to be that I think many of us had, where you really understood this was PG, this was PG-13. And so kids are really just exposed to a lot more. So I don't know that the expectation can totally be that your kid is not going to see it. It's really more about pre-warning your kids ahead of time. This may be a situation that you find yourself in. And so what I'm asking of you is that if that does happen, I really would want you to come to me and talk to me about it. You can always come talk to me. You may see something that made you uncomfortable. Also to make it really clear that some of those media images that they see, that's not really what real sex, what it actually looks like. I once had a friend of one of my kids tell me that when they were young, casually mentioned that their favorite TV show was Orange is the New Black, which is a very sexually explicit TV show. And, so I said to my kid afterwards, I said, look, I would just be so sad if that's how you learned about sex, because it's not what real sex is. That's a TV version of what sex is. And so it's really just talking to your kids constantly. I actually think you have to talk about it more than we ever had to, because our kids are unfortunately just bombarded with it. So I don't know that the goal can totally be that your kid is not going to be exposed to anything. But what I actually think the goal is that I'm here to talk to you about it. I'm here for you to come to me if you find yourself in a situation where you're not sure what to do. And I'm, I know I'm sharing like a lot of anecdotes because I want to make it clear, like nothing that I do is actually perfect with any of my children. So one of my kids recently was somewhere who's in high school. They went to watch a movie and they ended up watching a rated R movie. I have no idea where the parents were. It was like a whole thing. My kid kept texting me. He was very upset what was happening. And I knew the movie was not bad enough. It was more like a language-based, thing that I said to the kid when he came home. I said, look, what I'm proud of is that you texted me the whole time. I knew the entire time what was happening and I knew what was going on. And that's really what was important. And then we talked about what was wrong with the movie and why they shouldn't have seen it. But the point was, what I was so thrilled about as a parent is that my kid totally came to me and talked to me about it. So it's not that I'm going to protect my kid from every bad situation, but I want my kids to really understand I'm always available to talk to you. And that I really want them to understand that unfortunately the media is not in their favor. It wants to expose them to things that they really should not be seeing. And it's not just even within a Jewish context. It's just these are not things that 11, 12, and 13-year-olds should be seeing. And so I think that, again, I could spend a whole hour just talking about media, but I think the media challenges of so much being visual now really makes this piece of talking to our kids about sexuality even more important. And actually, it's like urgent. And this is really what a public health issue, because once kids are sensitized to this type of pornography, first of all, much of it is very violent. So they don't really understand what normal sexual encounters are supposed to look like. And then we also know that as they get to be adults, if they become aroused from this type of pornography, they actually have issues with arousal and with sexual satisfaction later on, because what they're learning to be aroused by is not anything that actually really takes place in typical bedrooms. And, I know from a few friends of mine who are therapists, and Rachel, then I'll hand it off to you, that then you have young couples coming in where, one part of the couple, and I would never say that it's just men because I don't want to ever play it that way, has an expectation of, let's say, a certain act or a certain something happening in the bedroom because it's something that they saw, time and time again, and don't necessarily have a distinction between something that is a fantasy versus something that in reality should actually happen. So this is just something you almost have to talk about with your kids, I would almost say on a monthly basis.
Yeah. I think like porn talks start before it's even about porn, right? Which is like what we're saying here. Like these talks about sexuality and consent and relationships and respect and like having open conversations and like shame-free, like just open, connection with our kids, like is so important, so that when let's say they are exposed to something that somebody on the bus shows them or whatever it is, like you can come and have this discussion with them. I think it's really important for us to start like establish ground rules with our kids collaboratively, just in terms of their media use, not to dictate to your kids, this is where you put your phone, this is what time you can be on it, this is what you can look at. You encourage them to work with you on how to create an environment for them where they can make responsible choices. You set parameters together. So, what time do you think is reasonable for you to be on your phone until? Let's all agree that we all plug in our phones downstairs in the kitchen or in the front hall or whatever it is. Devices are always used with doors open and in communal spaces. Or if you are in your room because, it's quiet up there, the door should be open. What questions are okay to Google, right? Like, so if a kid is curious about kissing, like, you don't know what can come up when they're looking about, researching kissing. So we have to talk to them about that. Like there are certain questions that are only going to be for trusted adults like me or daddy or whoever your trusted adults are in this child's life. And then other things, those questions we don't look for on Google. You come and you ask a person who can answer the question. We talk to them about not chatting with strangers online, what kind of things they can post online. That whole idea of digital citizenship is really important. Privacy settings, what to do if they see a picture of someone, like an inappropriate picture, or if somebody speaks to them in a way that's inappropriate or uncomfortable, always creating, again, that, like you said, Yardaena, that relationship where they feel like they can come and tell us and we would never be angry or blame them or shame them. No topic is taboo. We should also be modeling the habits that we want to see. So if we're glued to our devices constantly at the dinner table and when they're talking to us, then we can't tell them like, get off your device, you're always on it. Like yeah, but you're always on it too, mom or dad, or right. So we have to be modeling that. We have to set them up for success by giving them, again, these like parameters that they agree on together. I tell parents, when you give kids devices, write out a contract with them that you guys agree on. It doesn't have to be rigid. You can always change the rules as they get older and have more freedom and more responsibility. Definitely important to have some kind of device in your home that is a filter. But again, I always say, like, it's not to like monitor. It is for monitoring, but also just to mentor. Like, you know, we have it also like for our phones, because sometimes we need a cutoff for how much, you know, we're on Instagram or whatever it is. It's not enough just to have a device in your home that blocks certain websites, because then when they're out at their friend's house, they can access it too. So it's not enough to plug it in and be like, okay, cool, like I don't have to talk to them. No, we still have to talk. We're putting this here because, you know, maybe we have a little one that's on the iPad and we want to protect them, but also we want to just create this environment of like that we need to be responsible. We understand that the internet is not our friend. It's a wonderful tool, but it can also be something that's very dangerous. And we want to be responsible about your use and our use. And then just in terms of having that porn talk with them when they're in their teenage years, definitely they have there's a great chance that they've been exposed to some kind of sexual content by age 11. So you can just bring it up. Again, no shame and no judgment. I just want to check in with you about something. It might feel embarrassing for us to talk about. It's totally normal, but like, have you ever heard of pornography, porn? Right? And they might be like, they might say no, even though they have. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they'll tell you yes. You could say, what do you know about it already? Just pause and listen. Affirm them, no judgment. Again, not freaking out. Like, I was asking the question because I thought you would say no, and now you said yes, and now I'm freaking out, right? No, it's okay. Okay, you saw it. Where did you see it? Like, how are you feeling? Let's talk about it. Tell them it's out there. It's easy to access, and I want to make sure that you have the facts before anything happens, because I want you to know, like Yardaena was saying, it shows sex in unrealistic ways. You know, it shows bodies that don't look like real bodies, right? Like, that's not how it works. The way that they film these videos is not always respectful. Most of the time, it's not respectful. The porn that they can access is free, so it's certainly not considered ethical porn, right? So it's not respectful to the people involved. It's usually abusive and violent and disturbing. And yes, like Yardaena was saying, I've had clients who have come to me who have spouses, it could be male or female, who want to engage in forms of sexual activity that feel violating and scary and weird and uncomfortable. And that's because their partner has been watching porn and is like, oh, well, I want to try that. But there's not that consent from the other partner, and they feel pressured and they don't know how to say no, or they feel like, well, I'm scared that she's going to cheat on me or he's going to cheat on me. And then there is all sorts of dysfunction in the marriage. So we really want to teach our kids that this is not where we learn about sexuality. It's not where we learn about relationships. It is something that people like to watch together. Maybe married couples do this, but we want them to know that that's not reality, and that's not something for them to be getting their sex education from. And certainly as children, it's not something we want them to see, because they just can't understand what's in front of them. And because a lot of it is violent and disturbing, we definitely want to protect them and teach them what to do. So also, you know, a rule is like, sometimes it'll pop up on a screen, or they type in the wrong thing, or maybe they were curious and then they changed their mind. You can say, you can always just close your computer, like if it's a laptop, close it. If it's your phone, turn it over. If it's the computer, just like walk away, turn off the screen and walk away and come tell me. I will never be angry. I want to help you. I want to protect you. That's my job. So they should never feel stuck of like, well, I had a minute of like, I was curious and I did want to look at it. And then when I did, I freaked out and I like didn't know how to stop. You give them the tools. You can still stop. Even if you got curious, close the laptop, turn over the phone, turn off the monitor, and just come and tell me. I'm here to help you. And again, being consistent with that, meaning that you're going to react in the way that you say you will, and not scream or shame them.
Right. Yeah, it's so important. You're right. We could have a whole hour discussion on just this topic. I would love to shift focus now that we're, sort of at the end of our session, to really actually talking about the good aspects of intimacy and sexuality. And when you have preteens and teens, actually talking to them about the mechanics of sex. And something I know that parents sometimes will say, especially in the teen years, there's a worry that if you teach them about it, you're giving them permission. And I'm very conscious of this when I teach, sex ed in a high school setting. And I think that a useful sentence or tool is to really give over sort of both both sides of what you're trying to navigate. You know, as halachic observant Jews, we have an expectation that sexuality, or not sexuality, because sexuality is a part of who we are, but that sex and intercourse and intimate touch is a part of a marriage relationship. And I also really care that you have the proper information, both from an intellectual perspective, but also from a safety perspective. I want you to always be safe. If you ever made a choice that was outside of halacha, I would want you to be safe. That the mitzvah of v'nishmartem me'od lenafshotechem, we should take care of ourselves, our bodies, very much, is a mitzvah, and it doesn't stand opposed to the halachot and mitzvot of sexuality and sex in the context of a marriage. They both exist at the same time. We have expectations and we have a halachic framework. You can say these are our family values. And I want you to know this information. It's so important that you know about how sex works, about STDs, and I think that people are afraid to say one because they feel it negates the other. And saying that "and" sentence, like "and we care about this, and we care about this," sometimes so helpful for students and for parents. So I guess let's hear, how do you actually, and sometimes people will say like, but what do you actually say? Do you say the penis goes into the vagina? Do you tell them about sexual pleasure? Like, what do we say to our preteens and our teens when they ask us, like, or not, they might not even ask us at this point, when we have to tell them about the mechanics of sex, about pleasure, about safety and sexuality?
I think that's where books can be great. I love this whole series. I don't think I got it in on time for a reading list, but there's a great series of books called It's Not the Stork. It's so amazing. Like, just look it up on Amazon or wherever. And I think that's where books can be great, because this is like, it's actually written as like a cartoon book. So what's nice about it is, and as Rachel said, always read the book beforehand so that it's presenting information in the way that you like. But what's great about that is, like, kids can sort of read it. You can then read it together, and then it's a reference for them to go back to again so that they can see the language again. So I think it is important to use like specific language of like, yes, the penis goes into vagina. Yes, people don't only have sex just to have children, but we also have sex because it's a way to connect with somebody. And also, because it's pleasurable and it's part of what a normal body and a normal human need should be. But I think that's why books are such a useful tool, because it sort of allows it allows you to say some of those words, but then also allows your child to sort of absorb or look at those words at their own pace. And so that's why I don't think only one modality of just doing this verbally works. It's really important to have something visual that they can take in, and also something, that they're hearing and is part of a discussion as well. And one thing I just want to add to that, and then Rachel, I'll pass it off to you, is, Ilana, when you were saying this sort of, I want to tell this to you and also this. So I think particularly with our older teens and our college age teens, I think that's a really important thing. Is like, if we've spoken about body agency the whole time, so then, also framing it in that, look, what values you were raised with, what things, what was important in our household, but whatever choices that you choose to make, I'm sharing this information with you because I want you to be as safe as possible. Right? So not going in with an expectation that your teen who's going to be in college is never going to make out with somebody, or may not even be there, but they could be the firmest kid in the world. But you know what? It's kind of okay if they mess up, because it means they're really very human and are in a good, sexually healthy relationship. So I think it's framing those things, like that sexuality or some of these halachot about negia and things like that should not be presented in a black and white way. It's not about you always being shomer negia. It's not about you always never touching the other person, but it's more about, I'm giving you a lot of information. Some of this may be relevant to you for the stage of life you're in now. Some of this may be more relevant for you when you get married or when you're in a serious relationship. And all of us always mess up, right? And just because something happens one time doesn't mean it's not going to happen another time. And I think there's also a really important piece of really warning kids that just because they're around other observant or religious kids, that some of these bad things don't happen. Things like date rape, things like drinks being spiked, or things like that. And, just because somebody has a keep on or is wearing a long skirt does not mean that things do not happen. That is just an outward appearance. It means nothing to do. And, when it comes to sex, we really don't know anything that goes on in anybody's personal life. That is actually the bottom line. So I think, not making it clear to kids that, like, yes, you may have certain values or certain expectations, but like at the end of the day, they're adults and they are going to choose to do things the way that they want to. And your primary objective is for them to be safe.
Yeah, that's great. And something that I just want to address that you had mentioned, Ilana, which I do hear a lot, is parents worry, well, if I talk about it with them, like, aren't they going to want to do it earlier? And the research actually shows that parents that have these discussions with their kids, they delay sexual activity much longer, and then they have better relationships. They're more likely to use contraceptives. They're more likely to make sure that they're being safe in their sexual activity. We know just in terms of just behavior in general, they're like less likely to have, teenage pregnancies, and they're more likely to finish high school. So there's all kinds of benefits to having these discussions. So it doesn't cause children to engage in sexual behavior earlier. If anything, it delays it because they have that information and there's not that curiosity. Something also that Yardaena was saying that I think is important, and I want to point out, is that there was like a survey that they did to ask teens, like, who influences their decisions about sex. So parents, 11% of parents thought that teens viewed them as the highest, 11%, yes, of adults thought that teens viewed them as the highest influencers. And 52% of teens said that their parents influenced their decisions about sex. So don't assign the outside world, their friends, pornography, whatever, as more powerful than your influence. You are the greatest influence in your child's life. Even if they seem like you're annoying and they can't stand you and you don't know anything and you're not cool, at the end of the day, they value what you have to say and your decisions and your lifestyle, and they want to be close to you. So relationship is so important, and do not underestimate the value of these discussions with them. I think it is so important to talk to your kids about sex being not just for building families, also just the reality of sometimes sex does not equal a baby. That happens in this world. But yes, it's for connecting, it's for pleasure, it's for closeness, it's supposed to feel good. You both have to want to do it. So it's not one partner wants and the other doesn't, but they convince you to. We both have to be in the mood. You can start up, saying, hey, we're in the mood, and then change your mind midway and just be like, you know what, I'm not in the mood. And your partner has to respect that. That's important. I think married couples, before they get married, should know this. I think this is something that should be taught. It's important that you as parents also show affection in front of your children. If that's something that you're uncomfortable with, it's important to maybe try to think about getting comfortable with it so that they see that it's normal, that we can show love in non-sexual ways. It's a good example for your children of other love languages, right? There's giving, and there's words of affirmation, and there's physical affection. And just like we show our children physical affection, we want to show that we show it to our partners too. That helps develop our relationship. Let them ask you questions. Again, you don't have to get personal about your sex life with their other parent, but let them ask you questions about, just in general about sex and about how you feel about it and your value system. Even tell them if you grew up in a home that it wasn't open, you can say, I didn't have these conversations with my parents. Like, nobody spoke to me about this stuff. I learned it from TV or from my friends or from my brother or, and this is what I thought. And like, I know that it wasn't good for me and I want to have these conversations with you. Always be honest with them. Again, like, no, if you don't know the answer, don't be afraid to tell them, what, that's a great question. And like, I don't know, actually, let me like go ask, a therapist or a Yoetzet or a doctor or a rabbi. Let me go find out for you because that's really important. And I want to give you the right answer. Thank them for asking you. Like Yardaena said, like always, what, thank you so much. I'm so glad you came to me with this because it's important. I want you to know about this. I want you to have that information. I think that our kids need to always know, again, that we will always make sure that we give them answers when we can. And if we don't know the answer, that we're not afraid to tell them we don't know, and that we'll get them the right information. And I think that again, that will keep them safe. If they're ever in a predicament, also letting them know, if you're ever in a situation, you're with friends and you're uncomfortable, here's like, we can have like a code word that you text me to come pick you up, or that things are getting funky and you might want to be picked up, like I'm here for you in that way. And I'll never be angry. And I'll always be thankful that you felt like you could reach out and that I could be there for you. We want our kids to know, again, that we're on their side. We are their advocate. We're there to keep them safe. We're not there to like try to like catch them and get them in trouble and tell them what they're doing wrong. We want to just give them the tools to lead a safe and happy and healthy life. And I think that these conversations are really the way to do that. So again, just keeping it shame-free, open, and yeah, just knowing that you have a tremendous amount of influence in your ability to have these conversations. And again, I think a lot of parents think that they're not the person to get to have this conversation, that they want to give it to the school, or maybe they'll give it to their college teacher or their teacher in seminary, but it really should be coming from you. The rest of that should just be like added on, supplemental, you know, that they already have it. And oftentimes, sometimes schools, even if you send us to a school that's very in line with your values, there might be things that they teach that are not in line with your values. So you really want to make sure that it's really coming from the home first, and then everything else is kind of just an added on, a bonus, or that they know how to filter out, oh, okay, that's not really something that like we believe in my home. You know, I'm going to leave that one to the side. And I think we do our kids a lot of justice that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's so empowering. I think the bottom line is, you know, for us to feel empowered, that openness, that communication, it's a lifelong conversation. And in terms of the aspect of the sort of the kedusha, the Jewish perspective, something that was, you know, coming into my mind as we're concluding is that one of the terms for intimacy or for intercourse or sexuality, for sex in the Torah is ladat, vaidat, that they knew or that they know each other. And I think it's not just knowing the other person, but it's also knowing yourself. And when we have these conversations with our kids, we're telling them, know yourself, know what feels good to you, know your boundaries, know what you're not comfortable with, know what your values are, know what your scientific knowledge is. And all of that knowledge really contributes to the health and the holiness of a person's intimate life. So thank you both for joining me in this conversation. I think we've given over a lot of really helpful tools. If you want more, there are resources that are available to you in the Socio platform, and you can look those up. And you can always feel free to email me. I'm sure if Rachel and Yardaena want to share their emails as well. But my email is always available on the web, yoetzet@gmail.com. You can always email me for further resources if you need. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Hope you have a wonderful day. And please continue to join the amazing sessions in this conference. It's unbelievable. I'm really looking forward to the other sessions as well. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.